to leave that to you, like whatever you prefer. We only have like an hour, and this is, I give like a semester course on this at Hebrew University every year. So it's it's a short time, and therefore whatever you prefer to focus on is good for me. So let me just give a brief outline of like where we are, if you want. Like I say, I think it's a crucial and even existential issue for the future of Israel in several ways. And again, you can look at it from different angles, but it's certainly a very important issue. And as we know today, the questions of the government and the social cohesion of Israel's social fabric, and the question of the military and military service and so on, that there's so much which we can focus on. But okay, let's start with general principles, and then, like I said, I'll just try to open it up and whatever you think. So Israel is Baruch Hashem an amazing project of the modern world. The state of Israel, I think I wouldn't be revealing any deep secrets when I say that it's truly a wonder of modern human history. The very idea that you have millions of Jews belonging to this ancient nation coming back to their ancestral homeland and creating a modern state replete with its institutions, its branches of government, strong economy, a decent army, decent enough to vanquish all of these bitter enemies that are trying to destroy. That's pretty impressive. And that's really, I don't think I'm here to tell you about the wonder of the modern state of Israel. Let's take that as a given. However, together with the really pioneering, amazing project of the state of Israel, which is the realization of a movement, of the Zionist movement, that came with the aspiration, with the goal of establishing a Jewish state, and was able to realize its aspiration. That's an amazing project. Side by side with that project is another pioneering project that really kind of, I would say, traced a parallel line together with the state of Israel, and that's the pioneering project of rebuilding the Torah world that was destroyed, that was decimated in the Holocaust, and re-establishing it as a force to reckon with in the Torah sense, in the sense of yeshiva institutions, communities whose raison d'etre is devotion and prayer and closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hasidic courts, each one with its specific disposition and its thing, and of course multiple Hasidic courts, religious services of the type that people just totally dedicated to whichever area within religion, which includes, of course, a tshuva movement which has developed and really thrived over the years. And in a certain sense, of course, that there are bridges, but in a certain sense, that pioneering project, which for Israeli Haredi society is a separate project, is a project that developed along parallel lines that don't necessarily meet. That project has also been an incredible success. It's also been a project that has met with unprecedented success and thriving. In Europe, I have a friend whose grandmother lived in Mir of Europe, and yes, and she used to tell him that there was once a time when the whole Mir shtetl was animated by this incredible news that they'd received from, I don't remember where it was, some neighboring place in Poland, and the incredible news was that there were two people who had become Balei Tshuva. and it was like nobody would understand, like, how could this happen? Two people that became frum, became ballet children. It was such a revolution, and which gives us a perspective of how things were in Europe. When Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, made all of these concessions to the newly established so-called Chareidi society in Israel. And these concessions related to army service, of course, that's the most heatedly debated one today, but it included a bunch of others too. It included autonomy over education. Charedim were given their own autonomous educational system. They don't have to be a part, it's very unusual. Right? There's a state education system, but the Charedim have their own. They don't have to be a part of the state system. So that was also an important concession. There were a bunch of issues of religion and state that were also given as so-called concessions at the time. Later on, of course, there were a lot of geographical, you could call them concessions, but at the very least, they were benefits that Chareidi society continues to enjoy in terms of setting up entire cities that are delineated, defined as Chareidi cities. So all of this for Ben-Gurion was setting up a museum. It was, this is going to be the museum that people can come and see how things used to be. What was once Judaism, or how the Jews once used to live. The trend, the religious trend around the world, but certainly for Jews, was very much a negative trend in terms of religious observance, in terms of religious devotion. The thought that there would be this reversal or upheaval and a rebirth or a rejuvenation of religious devotion within the Jewish people, this would not have crossed anybody's mind at the time. I have a woman I know, she's an elderly lady today, and she tells of when her father brought her to a hilltop overlooking Meir Sha'arim in the 50s, and he told her, take a good look at what you see down there, take it all in, because soon there won't be anything left. This was what the expectation was, and we might shake our heads, but that's what it was reasonable to expect that at the time. This is when the Shomer HaTzair was striding through Meir Sha'arim with clubs, and nobody thought that this would be somehow turned around or reversed. So it was natural, it was easy for Ben-Gurion to make these concessions and to allow for this redevelopment. And this is what he writes to his friend, Rav Maimon. Ben-Gurion had a rabbinic friend called Rav Maimon. Rav Maimon, together with all the other rabbis at the time, was plugging for the exemption or the deferral of army service for yeshiva students to allow the rebuilding of the rehabilitation of these decimated Torah institutions. And he says, yeah, I appreciate that. I think that there is a project, there is an impulse that we need to be respectful of rebuilding these Torah institutions, and I'm happy to give this exemption. And he writes this in a letter. And you know what? From the perspective of the rabbinic leadership of this kind of newly formed Chareidi society here in Israel, there were similar sentiments. The Chazon Ish, who is Rabbi Avraham Yishayahu Karelitz, one of the great rabbinic leaders at the time of inception. So he's also on the record as saying, these guys have managed to kind of set up a state, but who knows where it's going? Who knows if it'll have longevity? Who knows if it will be able to sustain itself over time? He once, remarked that, these guys are like a group of, he called them bandits. It sounds a bit, unpleasant to refer to it today, because Baruch Hashem, it's a very robust and great place. But for him, a bunch of guys, they've managed to take control over the area of land, but who knows where it's going? And from just very different perspectives, and different perspectives on what we're trying to do. It's a very, very different project, not just in their areas of focus, but also in their mindsets concerning the Jewish the Jewish continuity, what we're trying to actually do. From the Ben-Gurion / Zionist, or let's just call it secular Zionist perspective, and the great majority of Zionism was secular Zionism. So the perspective was, we're doing something completely new. We're overseeing a transition from powerlessness to power. A transition from, exile to redemption, not redemption in the religious sense necessarily, but redemption in the sense of a nation redeemed. Okay, think of Pinsker, who is one of the more radical, if you want, formulations of what Zionism is. Pinsker was a little bit before Herzl, so this is in the 1870s. And he writes, he's a more radical author, but he writes, why do the nations hate us? Why is there anti-Semitism? Well, he says, because we're such a strange nation. He says we're a nation, he calls us, we're a nation of ghosts. He says it's a nation of spirits without a body. We don't have politics, we don't have a state. We're a nation that separated the spirit from the body. He says we're a bunch of races. And of course, the nations don't know how to, and as soon as we'll have a state, then we'll solve the quote-unquote Jewish problem, because then we'll be a normal nation among others. We'll have politics, we'll have a state, we'll be, right? Again, we can look with hindsight and say, hey, this didn't quite solve the anti-Semitism problem, but to gain perspective. So Herzl wasn't as radical, he didn't speak in those terms. Herzl was more respectful of tradition and so on. But nevertheless, the spirit was that this is a radical transition, okay, from powerlessness to power, from a state of exile, which is a state of weakness in terms of the national spirit, weakness in terms of what defines or what underlies the internal motion of the Jewish individual, right? Is it somebody who is, trying to live his own life of religious devotion, bent over the lectern, in a position or an internal motion of vulnerability and dependency and so on the host nation and on whoever the power is, to taking matters into our own hands, to building a position of strength, of standing upright, of being confident, of, it's just totally different. And of course, it was a movement that was, it didn't invent secularism. Secularism was there a long time before Zionism came along, but it was a secular movement. In fact, it took that secular impulse that was very much shared by the many other movements of Europe, whether it was the Bund or socialism or emancipation or whatever it is, communism, but gave it something Jewish. Okay, said, you know what, to be Jewish, you don't have to be a frum guy. You can be a nationalist Jew, and that's a good Jew too, right? You can give your shekel to the WZO, the World Zionist Organization. That's a way of being a good Jew, till today, that's very much part of the conversation, right? What is a good Jew? How do you define a good Jew? So for the communists and the socialists, they weren't trying to define what a good Jew is. They were trying to define what a good human being is. And they were saying, you know what, you can be Jewish and be a good human being by being a good communist. That's a way of being a good human being. In Zionism, that was redefined. It wasn't being a good human being. This is how to be a good Jew. right? A good Jew is a nationalist Jew. Now, from the Chareidi perspective, okay, this parallel pioneering project, this was something to keep your distance from, okay, because that project was a project of perpetuation. That project was a project of, hey, we don't want to be, Me'at Tanakh la Talmach, to skip the 2,000 years from David HaMelech to David Ben Gurion, which was a real, it was a real perspective, right? Of this goddess Judaism. We have to go back to something else. That's why Ben Gurion was such a keen student of Tanakh. What was his favorite book of Tanakh, Ben Gurion? Which book? Which one? No.
Yecheskel?
No. Yecheskel is philosophical. He was very practical. Yehoshua, yes, Sefer Yehoshua. He always went back to Sefer Yehoshua. He was a very keen student of Tanakh. Even during, during Milchemet HaAtzmaut, right, during our War of Independence, Ben Gurion kept going with his Chuk Tanakh once a week. He had a Tanakh class at home. It's wonderful. But there's something very deep over there, right? We're returning to Tanakh, right? We're going back to Sefer Yehoshua. It's amazing. You could call it presumptuous, but it's just amazing. And this was a mindset. It was a very strong mindset. And the Chareidi were saying, hey, 1 second. We have 2,000 years of you could call it 2,000 years of Galus, 2,000 years of Galut. But those years of Galut were not years in which we were idle. We didn't just sit there and do nothing, right? We have this amazing development specifically over years of hardship that includes, the Talmud. The Mishnah was, a project, an Eretz Israel project, but we have the Talmud or the Talmudim, and we have the Rishonim, and we have the Go'onim, and we have the early Achronim and the late Achronim, and all of these were written in times of Goddess that developed on the imagined and reimagined how does the Jewish people live in their relationship with Hashem, with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, right? And that relationship is expressed, is realized through this entire corpus that we call halakha, right? And again, it begins with ancient origins. It's based on the Tanakh, but then it's developed, right? The Mishnah and the Gemara and the commentaries until contemporary poskim and us, and we're carrying on that thread, that path. We're not abandoning it. We're not saying, okay, big X, let's go back to Tanakh and think of Judaism as a national project that is separate or somehow divorced from the halachic side. That's not how we see it. We see the Jewish nation as a nation that walks with God in the way that our forefathers, our ancestors gave us, and we're writing the next chapter of that history, which is a cogent, coherent, and continuous history. And that's why these lines, I refer to them as parallel lines, because who's studying mathematics, where do parallel lines meet?
They do have a bunch of math teachers in the audience.
Yeah. It's a shame about parallel lines. They have so much in common, but they'll never meet.
Well, you know what? They meet at infinity.
Would they meet
In a non-linear.
So, yes. So they meet, but they don't meet as we know them in human experience. They don't meet, and this was kind of by design. It was by design, but just to emphasize, it was by design from both sides. The secular Israel was not interested in meeting this other parallel line. Like I said, it was museum or something to reflect upon. But there was no great impetus to say, let's integrate or it was like a parallel line. And from the Chareidi side also, it was just two different projects. One was everything is new, we have to drain the swamps. It's this wonderful pioneering project of something new. and it's a line that begins in 1948 or begins in 1897 or wherever we want to begin it, but it's a modern line, it's a recent line with strong sharashim. It has foundations, it has roots, but it's something very new. While the Chareidi line is saying we want continuity. We want to carry on. Think about the yeshivas, the yeshivot, the Chareidi yeshivot. Okay, which is again in contradistinction to the religious Zionist yeshivot. The Chareidi yeshivot are all named after the old yeshivot. Meir Yeshiva, Panovich Yeshiva, Grodno, Slobodka, all the yeshivot. They're all just they take on these names from Europe. Why? So that's the whole raison d'etre. That's the whole idea. Right, the perpetuation, we're just rebuilding, we're continuing. Yes, the circumstances are new. Yes, it's a different environment, different part of the world. But the idea was, in contradistinction with the Zionist project, to perpetuate and to continue. And the same, of course, is true of the Hasidic courts. Whether it's all of them, whether it's Ger or Belz or Vishnitz or Rachmas Rivka or you name it, it's all continuity. It's all, we'll dress the same, we'll daven the same, we'll speak the same. Even Yiddish as a language, which the Litvish abandoned. It's interesting. In the Litvish world, that was abandoned. The Hasidim still continue to speak Yiddish. Why? In America, the Litvish still speak Yiddish, but in Israel, not. In Israel, they abandoned. Why did they abandon Yiddish? Who knows? Actually, it's a good question, right? Why would you abandon Yiddish? If your entire project is a continuity project, then why move to Hebrew? And the answer here was because of pragmatic considerations. Also, Chazon has decided we're abandoning Yiddish. Why? Because he saw that, hey, this Zionist enterprise of bringing Jews back to Israel is succeeding. He said all the Sephardi Jews that are coming here from around the world, okay, from Morocco and Tunisia and Yemen and Iraq and Iran and all the other countries around the world. So, well, these guys are not going to be speaking Yiddish. And if the yeshiva world is going to be an option for the Sephardi Jews, then we have to move to Hebrew. So it was a pragmatic calculation, but it was one that was very not intuitive for the Chareidi internal motion. Right? The intuition would be to carry on speaking Yiddish. And the Hasidim did. And the Litvish said, you know what? We're changing because of our broader responsibility to the Jewish world and understanding that the yeshivas need to be open to the Sephardim too, who are not coming from Europe. Okay, so you have these two parallel projects. Okay, this is the how things began, and good, meaning they both thrived. Okay, they were both a tremendous success, and to a great extent, they also didn't get in each other's way too much. The Charedim were able to thrive and to grow and to burgeon and to develop their own project without being disturbed. On the contrary, with the great support of the State of Israel. The State of Israel, greatest supporter in financial terms of Torah in the history of the Jewish people, by far, no doubt about that. And it should be noted, the Haredi impulse of isolating from modernism, which is really what defines Haredi Judaism, to try to isolate. There's such a thing as modern orthodoxy, which says we're orthodox, but we're also modern. We appreciate that there's good in modernity. We appreciate that there's dangers. What's our solution to that in modern orthodoxy? The solution is, I would say the solution is education. We'll try to educate our kids to take the good and to reject the bad. Is it simple? No. I don't think any of us will kid ourselves that that's a simple solution. But it's like the only solution, because we don't want to deny our modernity. We don't want to deny the fact that we appreciate some of the values of modernity. We like to see ourselves as being autonomous, let's say, as being democratic, as having a strong individualism, and these are modern ideas that we appreciate, and we therefore define ourselves by them today. Maybe we even like to be authentic. Well, maybe.
You're
because
defining modern orthodoxy right now, but
yes.
not the Tilomi.
I'm speaking about modern orthodoxy, not the Tilomi. The Tilomi has a whole. There are areas of the Tilomi world that are more, quote unquote, modern orthodox in their leanings. There are areas that are more Chareidi in their leanings. But I'm not speaking yet about the Tilomi. I'll be happy to speak about it. But it is easier to speak about modern orthodoxy as a in distinction with Chareidi Judaism. And the Chareidi Judaism said that that's too dangerous. We're not going to take that route. We're going to define ourselves in opposition to modernity, in rejection of modernity, not Amish, not horses and carts, but rejection of modernity in its value system, in terms of we're in the Chareidi space. The idea was to build communities that try to keep out the winds of change in the value system and in the culture. In Europe, that was an abysmal failure. This didn't work. The communities in Europe were decimated in a spiritual or religious sense, and the attempt to build these walls, to erect boundaries that would keep out the modern winds of change, just didn't work. It just wasn't working. In every yeshiva, you had all the literature and all the books, and the spirit of the modern world pervaded even yeshiva institutions, including Velosh, including Knesset Israel, which is today it's called Hebron, but that was at the time in Slobodka. And while in Europe that project didn't work, to the degree that before World War II, on the eve of World War II, think about the lifetime of Rav Kook. The lifetime of Rav Kook was from 1865 to 1935. 70 years. Within those 70 years, the Jewish people had transitioned from being more or less 90% observant to more or less 90% non-observant. It's crazy. Within just a few decades. And eve of World War II, really, I don't know how much hope there was for observant Judaism in Europe. The trend was abysmal. It was terrible. And then in the state of Israel, it's like reversal. The Chareidi world was able to somehow pull it together. Now again, the Tilomi deserves a space in this conversation, and we and Eda are happy to speak about it. But Rav Shalom Noach Berezovsky, who was he? The Slonomer Rebbe, the Tivot Shalom. So he writes in the late 70s. Okay, this was published in 1984 or something in a small contrast called Haharuga Alecha. It's in the series of the Tivot Shalom. There's a small contrast called Haruga Alecha, which is on issues of exile and redemption. And he writes, he says, I'm looking around in the late 70s. He's looking around. He says, I'm rubbing my eyes in disbelief. He says, I'm ma'amid. He says, where do all these Avrechim come from? Where does all this Torah study come from? Where do all these Hasidic courts come from? He says, I've never seen, he says in Europe, we didn't have anything near these kinds of institutions and the numbers. And of course, you could answer, well, because this is Israel, and Israel we have support. His answer was, it's a miracle. And both are true. It's a miracle, but it's a miracle of the state of Israel. It's a made in Israel miracle. All right. So we have these parallel tracks, okay? And like I said, both, wonderful stories. Israel, wins the War of Independence and the 6-Day War, and goes through challenges, of course. There's the Yom Kippur War, there's challenges, but altogether, fast forward till today. We have challenges, but still, it's an amazing miracle of the modern world. And the Chareidi society on its parallel track also, this is Nasiba Shalom writing in the late 70s, we're 45 years after that, the numbers and the institutions and the political power, it's really, bizarre to think about just to what degree both of these, parallel pioneering projects have met with unprecedented success. The thing is, though, that because of their success, and specifically because of the success of the very surprising success of this Chareidi project, so, if we imagine these two lines, okay, you've got this big line called Israel, and then you've got this very narrow line called the Chareidi. At inception, the Chareidi were like 2% of Israel's population, 2.5%. And this line just began thickening out, right? Growing and growing. And to the degree that it really began to encroach on this, big line of the state of Israel. And to say, okay, what do we do? Today, Chareidi society, how am I defining Chareidi society? I don't know, it's very difficult to define. But let's just define it as families that send their kids to the Chareidi educational system. Okay, and that makes my life easier. Because otherwise, what is it? What does it mean? I'll be happy to expound on that, by the way. But let's just talk about the Chareidi educational system. And that's become today something close to 40% of Israel, from 2 to 14 in a few decades. And even today, at a time when
14, not 40, right?
14.
Yeah.
1-4, yeah, that's not exaggerated. 14. And well, in the educational system itself, it's more than a quarter. Meaning, if you look at kids, it's more than a quarter of Israel, more than 25%.
Well, so in Yerushalayim, right? Were you more like 25%
Yerushalayim,
of
it's like
Yerushalayim?
40. No, Yerushalayim.
No, not children. I'm saying, I think in general in the population of Yerushalayim, Charedim are more like 25%, not 14%.
More. Charedim are, well, if you include East Jerusalem, it depends. If you include the Arabs, if you include East Jerusalem, then it's something like 30-some percent. 30, I didn't remember exactly. But so again, today we've reached, I'll just very simplify today. Today we've reached a point where this model is untenable. Okay, it's not possible. It's there's no way, I didn't see any way in which this Chareidi project, this isolationist line can continue as it was in the 70s. And I think that's for 3 reasons. Okay? One reason is because the world today doesn't allow for isolationism. It doesn't work anymore. You can pretend it works, but in a digital age, in an age of internet, in an age also where Chareidi society is so big, and it's by definition a part of Israel for its own sustainability, and also because the self-perception of so many Charedim is Israeli in a deep way. You share the same country for so many decades. You share the same challenges and the same successes and failings. You grow up, even my kids, and this is it's anecdotal, of course, but it's an anecdote that is pretty representative. My kids going back from Beis Yaakov schools. So the girls have these old MP3 players, the little square ones that we used to love. And in Korea, we still love them. They're good because the kids don't have phones, which is nice. And they have the MP3 players instead. So, but what's on the players? Okay, so they come back from maybe like Beis Yaakov schools. It's not what we grew up with. I speak about myself, right? We grew up with, what was our music? We had MPD. We had, maybe Shweki was just beginning to come into things. Avram Fried. That's what we grew up with. and the expectation would be that the kids will grow up with the new Yaakov Shweki and Moti Steinmetz, the new version of the Hasidic music. But that's not what they're coming back with. They're coming back with, Shaligo and Hanan Ben Ali and Omer Adam and Helen Perez. That's what they're coming back home with. I'm not kidding. That's what the kids are getting from their Beis Yaakov schools. The culture itself. So it's true that there are red lines. Some won't have Keren Peretz and they won't have Static and Benel because that's too secular. And I get it. But, and it's true, there's still some, the isolationist temple still there on some level. Okay, the kids, they don't have smartphones, which is great, and so on. But it's very Israeli. The Haredim that go to Chutz La'aretz and they hear Hebrew, they get excited. Right? Why? Because it's Hebrew, it's our language. The Ben Yehuda project, we can crown that as an amazing success for Haredim too. Okay, don't forget there was incredible opposition to that from the Haredi side of the world. And it's done, we're done. Right? Israel has become a powerhouse of Torah study. That's something that needs to be appreciated at the very least, whether it is or isn't. But just the thought of Haredi women who used to be teachers until the late 80s and 90s and so on. But today, where do these Haredi women work? They work at Google and Amdocs and Mobileye and Intel. It might be an isolation, but it's not as we know it. That's not, you can't really do it, yes.
So let's open up the elephant in the room.
Just a question about the army, actually.
Can you hear the other two reasons on why?
Yes,
I'm so sorry.
Let me just finish this train of thought, and then I'll open every elephant you want. That's one reason, right? It's just that the modern world and the size of Haredi society and where this has led it makes it untenable. But it's also untenable from Israel's perspective. From the perspective of Israel, for any number of reasons, the idea of keeping Haredi society on the side of Israel as a kind of dependent enclave society which is not self-sufficient and not contributory in the civic sense, that's also untenable. For Israel, on an existential sense, we need to have the Haredim in. And I would say for three basic reasons. One reason is because of just technical need. The technical need of Israel's economy is that we need the Haredim in. We need GDP. The GDP, the growth is not a luxury for Israel. It's existential because of the amount we spent on defense and the amount we're going to spend on defense. And therefore having the Haredim in the economy is a huge, huge issue. Till today, more or less 50% of Haredi men are not in the workforce, at least not on the books. And even the 50% that is on the books earns something like 50% of non-Haredi Israeli Jews. And that's just not good enough. Haredi Jews can be leaders in the economic sense, talented people who are, could be the locomotive of the Israeli economy. And that's in the economic sense. But there's also, that's technically, and technically includes the military. Today, the military just needs, last night, okay, I sat with a general called General Zini, who's trying to set up a Haredi brigade, and I sat with him and with Shai Tai, who second in command to him, who is a Tataluf, I don't know how you say that in English, but a Tataluf, probably a major general, I'm not sure. And we sat together with Rabbi and with someone else speaking about what do we do. And he said, listen guys, the military needs another two ukdot. An ukdah, in English we call that an army. Okay, we need another 2 armies. And we need boots on the ground, we need the Haredim, just technical. Okay, so that's on the one hand, Israel needs the Haredim technically. Okay, On the other hand, we need the Haredim socially. The social fabric of Israel is being torn apart. And one of the issues is the Haredi issue. It's not the only issue. There are other issues. But it's one big issue. And in terms of Israel's social fabric, we need the Haredim in. Will the entry of Haredim into institutions, into Israel and so on, will that fix the social fabric? No. But it'll help. It'll help. And I also think that if we're talking about the religious Zionists, I think that where we need to start is with the alliance or the molding of religious Zionism and Haredi space. And it's not simple because religious Zionism has many colors. There's the more liberal side, an extreme liberal side, and there's more like super Haredi side. So it's not, I'm not simplifying that. That's
There's also many colors.
Yeah.
Haredim are also very many colors.
Haredim are
Yes.
very many colors, absolutely. And I haven't even spoken about that.
Have you seen
but that-
leaving Israel?
Well, there's just a third reason, okay? And you're good at this. And the third reason is, for me, is one of the deepest reasons. And the third reason is, well, what do we want? What do we, the Haredim, want? Like, ma אנחנו רוצים. And then ultimately, there's no, to want to isolate, you don't want to isolate. Isolationism is a strategy, right? But what do you want ultimately? And as Haredim become more and more numerous in terms of the demographic, in terms of the population, I think that the Haredim have to ask themselves that question. Like, what do we want? If you want, I'll give you a quick anecdote on that. I heard
We have like 30 seconds.
a few years ago. Sorry.
No, I think we're like another 5 minutes. No, when
we
is the
can
next
go.
house
Can we
coming?
go until 10:15?
10:10.
Oh, we go to 10, but we have another 2 minutes.
So I just heard this question being asked to Yanki Litzman, who was the health minister at the time, and they asked him, "What do you want? Like, let's say you have a majority. What do you want?" He says, "We'll always be a minority." And imagine, he says, "No, we're a minority by definition. It's not good enough. We want. If we ask what do we want the Jewish people. We don't want the Haredim. The Haredim are not interesting. The Jewish people are interesting. And we need to redefine this project from this Noah's Ark to a lighthouse. We're big enough, a strong one. It has to be a lighthouse to be able to take responsibility for the Jews. It's not about being Haredim. Again, there's too many Haredim that are stuck in that because it's been that way for too long. And the self-identity has become too strongly entrenched as we are the Haredim. It's a strategy of how do you preserve loyal Judaism? Good, okay, good for you guys. But ultimately, what do you want? You don't want to, if you're so focused on defending the walls, then you might have a nice house, but it'll be empty of content. You have to think, where's the content? Where's it going to go? What do you want? Well, Israel is a fact. It's a fact of tremendous success. Maybe you'll say, Daddy was sick. Do we want to operate? Don't we want to operate? Someone went and did the operation. It worked. Great. And now it's a fact. What do we want? And I think that's the third reason why something has to shift, something has to change. And my own work within the Haredi space, and I've other work too, but my work within the Haredi space is to reimagine how this looks when we are participant, integrated, take responsibility for Israel. There's no other way about it. The future defines that for all of these three reasons. But it needs an imagination, it needs rethinking, it needs redefining. What do we take? What do we believe? What do we want? Ultimately, these lines must converge, but the conversion of those lines isn't easy. There's, as you know, Israeli society is filled with tensions today, and those tensions are not necessarily Haredi, non-Haredi. They're there. those who suffer from this, well, everyone's suffering from these tensions, but it's I'm not going to get into it now, but I just want to say that I think if you take Jewish Israeli society, this is 100%. Okay, this is like 80%. Okay, you have extremes. You have the extreme secular. You have like extreme Chareidi, let's say, that are not going to be able to speak with each other. You have a good 80% that I remain deeply hopeful that we'll be able to find strong commonalities, strong common denominators here, to be able to envisage what a Jewish Israel looks like that will enable us to strive towards a vision that will be compatible with the 80% or 80% of 80%. I'm not sure exactly how many people are out here, but I think there's enough to have real hope. Israel will not be able to thrive on a tribal vision of, Ruby Rivlin, we have this tribe, this tribe, this tribe, this tribe. I hate that vision. It's not a vision that Israel needs to have a vision of a unified vision as a Jewish state, not as a state of people that want to bring bread and milk to the table. It's not good enough. Bread and milk will not be able to be a strong enough common denominator for a thriving Israel to defeat enemies, to have the commitment. Even today, that commitment is not as strong as we want it to be, and it's strong in the religious science world. It's very strong in parts of the secular world. It's strong. We need that commitment for a future of Israel as a Jewish state, as a realization of Jewish history, as a realization of, even in a secular sense, as a realization of the right for a nation to a national identity and what's called in the legal context self-realization. It's not just about living on a piece of land and bringing bread and milk to the table. It can't be. And that requires work. I'm trying to do that work within the Chareidi space and some other spaces, but it needs a lot of work.
What's the how here? We heard a lot of where we are now. What's the how? I guess back to the military or combining, or like what's the how?
So, but be more specific. That's too big.
It needs a lot of work and integrating and all of that, which I think everyone in this room could agree with. But how does that get started?
Well, it's being started. It's happening on many levels. So, Chareidi society is not monolithic. There's a lot of different parts of it, and there are definitely parts within Chareidi society that are very integrationalist. I would say the following: there's 3 ways. I like 3 in this. There's 3 ways of defining the different parts of Chareidi society. Okay, I'll give you the 2 traditional ones, and I'll give you the one I like. Okay, the 2 traditional ones are Litvish, Hasidish, Sephardim. Okay, that's like the traditional definition. You've got the Hasidim, you've got the Litvish. Litvish would be the biggest. Then Hasidim, which are also very big, and Sephardim. And each one has its own dress codes and its own. This barely passes in the Litvish world. Okay, but in Hasidim, lads wear a tie. That's like kfira, and the Sephardim could come in with shirt and pants and be fine too. But okay, it's too much to talk about. Then the more modern way of defining is along the spectrum of modernity. Okay, you have the very not modern. We don't have internet. We don't have secular books. We don't have anything. We don't have Sherlock Holmes. Like, we're really very, very not modern. Okay, and then there's a spectrum, and then we have the really modern. And modern is we go out to fancy restaurants, we go to Chutz La'aretz for our trips, we have internet, and we're very modern, okay? But we're still somehow Chareidi, whatever that means when you're here.
Usually
Okay.
the more times you say you're modern, the more times you people Chareidi.
I'm sorry?
More people say talk about being modern, not usually the more they mean they're Chareidi.
Modern means Chareidi.
The more someone says very modern.
No, Charedim speak about
I
being
know, right? But
modern.
the more they say they're modern, it's much more than. Like, nobody's defining the fact that they're Chareidi.
It's an internal Haredi
Right.
word, but it also means something objective, okay? But for me, the most defining is, do you see yourself as a part of Israel. You could be not modern in the sense of not reading Sherlock Holmes, but you understand that you're a part of Israel. That Israel is meaningful. That everything that's going on around us is not here by chance. That God is leading us to a certain place by means of the return of millions of Jews to Israel. And therefore you're Chareidi, but you're Israeli. So then Chareidi could mean that you don't have a smartphone and you don't read Sherlock Holmes. It was good for you. I'm okay with that. As long as you realize that you're a part of Israel and you have responsibility towards Israel. And then be Chareidi, don't listen to Hanan Ben Ali. Because listening to Hanan Ben Ali will change you. You won't be Chareidi in the traditional sense once you listen to Hanan Ben Ali. Good. So keep that out of your home. I don't have any problem with that. But realize that Israel is your home and that you have a responsibility towards Israel. And then you could be not modern or you could be modern. But you have Charedim who are not like that. You have Charedim that say that Israel is not a home. We're in Goddess among Jews. And Israel is the new stage of Goddess. It's Erev Rav or whatever you want. And the religious leaders are miskinim that they don't get it. And we could live, and like Rav Yosef said, if things get tough, we'll go back to Chutzah. And you have Charedim like that. And for me, that's defining. For me, that's the most important definition. And there are many today in the Haredi space that do see Israel as their home, that do understand and have responsibility towards Israel. And that's reflected in new schools, it's reflected in new communities, it's reflected in new publications. It's there. What are the percentages? I don't know. But that's,
I'm sorry. We
that's
have
my work.
30 seconds left. I'm sorry.
I'm basically done with it.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you.